and we are starting where we left off. So last week we finished the speech of the Nehenatan as we described it, and it ended with this description of he says very disappointed, very angry, very frustrated at the lack of any kind of accountability in reward and punishment, and he ends up taking the deep dive into the denial of any kind of world of spirituality or the world of the eternity of the soul, and essentially grasps hold of this world and its enjoyment as the only real reality left, haunted by the significant the status of what happens at the end of one's life, that this is a sort of a one end to all. The very last comment that the Nehenatan stated was Pasuk Tetzayin. I said, true, wisdom might be better than Gvura, than strength, but v'chokhmat hamisken bzuya. But the poor man, even if he's wise, but the poor man, because he's poor, because he doesn't embrace this world, because he doesn't have the wealth, money speaks in this world. Nobody listens to him. Nobody gives him the time of day. Ultimately, he is embracing completely the world of the here and now, the Nanatan, the world of the physical enjoyment of this world. And
Why is misken poor? It could be also somebody who is like
only,
miserable.
only in modern Hebrew. In biblical Hebrew,
Oh,
miskin is poor.
okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those words that shifted its meaning,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
it's actually a Yiddishism. Um, um,
Really?
yeah, misken is it's a Hebrew word, but it's also a Yiddishism. But in biblical Hebrew, it means somebody who is poor.
Okay.
Okay, that brings us to Pasuk Yud Zayin. Pasuk Yud Zayin, new speech, new focus, new agenda. We're going to from this two psukim through the next chapter. Divrei chachamim benachat nishmaim mizakat moshel baksilim. The words of the wise in quiet tones, benachat, are heard more than all of the crying, yelling, screaming of those who rule among fools. Tova chokhmah miklei krav. Wisdom is better than weapons of war. V'choteh echad ya'abed tavarbe. And one sinner can destroy, but one sinner can destroy much good, or one miss. Choteh can mean a sinner, choteh can mean a miss, can destroy much good. We'll talk. I'm going to just read through and translate, and then we're going to go back and look at it in detail. Zvuve mavet yavish yabia shemen rokeach. Dead flies will cause the oil of the perfumer to send out an evil, to spoil, to send out an evil odor. Yakar mechochma mikavod sichlut ma'at. A little folly, sichlut ma'at, will outweigh yakar, even the greatest wisdom and honor. Lev chacham limino v'lev ksili smolo. Man's the heart of the chacham is to the right side, the heart of the fool is to the left. We'll talk about what these words mean in a few minutes. Even when the fool walks, his understanding fails him. He turns to everything and he says, or to everyone and says, hey, there's the fool, right? Everybody, as he walks by and he opens his mouth, what's the old expression? Was Mark Twain's comment about better to be silent and let them think you're a fool than to open your mouth and prove them right, something to that effect. Right? Every time
There
he
is
looks, he says,
there's an expression in Hebrew that says "Gam evil macharish, chacham yechashev."
there you go.
Yeah, so it's a similar.
The spirit of the ruler rises up against you. Hold your place.
You want the exact quote?
I
Better
think it's
to
Mark Twain.
remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt.
Remove all doubt. All right, there you go.
Yeah.
Mark Twain, I believe. Because gentleness will lay great offenses to rest, will heal great offenses. There's an evil in the world today. An error that has emerged from the ruler. Folly is set on great heights. But those who are rich, and here this is, I'm going to take the liberty of assuming that this rich here is not rich in riches, but rich in wisdom, because it's the opposite of the fool, right? The fool sits on high, but the one who is wealthy and rich is in wisdom, he sits in a low place. I see servants on, or those who should be servants, on horses, the sarim, but those who should be servants and princes, those who should be princes and honored, they're walking like servants on the earth. Chofer gumatz bo yipol, he who digs a pit will fall into it. Poretz kader yishchen nachash, he who breaks through a wall will be bitten by a snake. Masiya vanim yatzeh behem, he who carves out stones will be injured by them. Bokea etzim yisachen behem, he who splits wood will be endangered by them. Im ke'ah b'zev ulefanim kilkal, if the axe is blunt and one doesn't sharpen it. Some discussion about how to translate the next two words. V'chayalim yigaber, either it means that the warriors have to put in more strength because their axe or instrument is blunt, or it means that they will not, that the word lo here carries over, v'chayalim lo yigaber, because of the blunt instrument, the soldiers will not be victorious. Yitron hachsher chochma, wisdom has the advantage over all. If a snake bites without charm, before it is charmed, meaning it bites on its own accord, there is no advantage to the charmer's tongue. The words of the wise mouth of a wise man's mouth are gracious, right? Whereas the fool is swallowed by his own words. Siftot ksil tvalenu. The beginning of his words are foolish. And the end of his words are foolish. The fool just talks and talks and talks and doesn't say anything. Man doesn't know what will be after him, who can tell him? That phrase seems not to fit. We'll talk about that phrase in a minute. The labor of fools tires them. They don't know how to go to the city. Woe to you, a land whose king is a child. And your princes eat in the morning. But happy are you, a land, when your king is free, noble. And your princes eat in the right time, in strength, and not because they are drunk. Out of laziness, the roof will sink. And through idleness, the house will leak. A feast is made out of laughter. And wine makes the life glad. Money answers all things. And I'm going to stop here because Pasuk Chaf changes to a second person. You don't curse the king. And I think that shifts us back into a different voice. So let's go back to the beginning. Parak Tet, Pasuk Yud Chet, Yud Zayin, I should say, and let's ask the basic question: who's speaking? This should be an easy one. How each line fits into the world of the Chacham, we'll see. But for now, clearly, this is the world of the Chacham. Calling card, identity card, right at the beginning. Divrei Chachamim benachat nishmaim. The words of the wise, heard in quiet, are better than the cry of those who rule among fools. Who is the ksil? Who's the fool? So that's more complicated, because on the one hand, the simplest explanation of the fool is the opposite of the chacham. Whoever is not the chacham is the ksil. In our case, he's going to apply the description of the ksil to multiple different groups of people in this passage. So we have to kind of navigate through to whom is he referring when he refers to the word ksil. Ksil is also one of those interesting Hebrew words because there's a bunch of different words that all revolve around the same root. Ksil is a fool. Sechel is folly or foolishness. Um, and that flips the letters around. So we'll see a little bit of how that works. But what is he referring to when he says that the words of the wise are heard in quiet tones even more than the screaming and yelling and crying out of the ruler among fools? So this introduction is essentially the foundation of this speech, and it's a direct response. What's it a direct response to? Go back one verse. The end of the Nenatan. When the Nenatan said, V'amarti ani, tova chokhma mikvura, that wisdom is better than strength, I'll grant that, but chokhmat hamisken bzuya, but the wisdom of the poor man is despised. Udvarav einam nishma'im, and nobody's listening to him. His words are not heard. Suddenly pipes in the chacham and says, I got news for you, my friend, the ksil, the fool, the nenatan. Divrei chachamim benachat nishma'im mizakat Moshe baksili. The words of the wise are heard. You claim they're not heard. V'arav einam nishma'im. I'm telling you they're more heard, more lasting, more impactful than all the cries amongst the greatest warriors of fools in the world. Divrei chachamim benachat nishma'im mizakat Moshe baksili. Why? Very simple. Because the Chacham speaks in content, and the Ksil does not. Meaning the Ksil has nothing to offer. His content is empty, and is temporary, and is ephemeral, and is here today and gone tomorrow. Whereas the Chacham, his words are maybe quieter. They may not have the impact, right? A newspaper's headlines make a lot of noise, but 24 hours later, they're in the garbage heap. Right? Because ultimately what is heard and what is lasting is words of wisdom and in insight. I'm always, as an example, I always like to quote the parallel. Does anybody know who the ruler of China was in the fourth, fifth century? Actually, it's 5th century before the Common Era. Anybody know the ruler of China was in the years 550 to 450 BCE? Probably not. Probably have to look it up, right? Anybody ever heard of Confucius?
Yeah.
Confucius was a philosopher. Confucius lived in exactly the same time as the ruler of China. His name was Duke Ding of Lu. Nobody's ever heard of him. He was a great warrior. He was a massive conqueror. He was all-powerful. Here today, gone tomorrow. Confucius was a philosopher. He said wise things. Until today, his words are quoted. If you look at the perspective of history, the ksil is not going to be around tomorrow. They will last for eternity. That's a kind of a put in perspective where he's coming from. On the other hand, the Natan made an argument which needs to be addressed, which is nobody's listening to the Chacham because he is poor, because he has no money, because he's not involved in the world, because he's not a builder, because he's not doing great things, because he's not ruling the world. So now the Chacham has to address that problem. And so he moves into an address in the following verses. Tova chokhma miklei krav. Let's acknowledge, first of all, that wisdom is better than weapons of war, which, by the way, was the same position as the Chacham. It's the others, the Nenatan. It's the other statement of the Nenatan. Tova chokhma mikvura. Wisdom is better than strength. Granted, but nobody's listening to the wise man, said the Nenatan. Comes along the Chacham and says, let's start with this. Tova chokhma miklei krav. Wisdom is better than tools of war. However, one sinner destroys much good. I'll come back to that phrase. It's easier to see his message in the next phrase, which says the same thing, which is Zivuve Mavet Yavish Yabia Shemen Rokech Yakar Mechochma Mikavod Sichlut Mat. Dead flies cause the oil of the perfumer, the park, to send forth an evil odor. Zvuve Mavet Yavish Yabia Shemen Rokech. What's he saying in that statement? Or a folly outweighs wisdom and honor. Right. Essentially, what he's arguing, and I'm going to boil it down to two very famous idioms or aphorisms in a moment, but if you are looking at the perspective of a giant vat of beautiful, pure oil, right? Shemen rokeach, the oil of the apothecary, doesn't take much to ruin it. Because all you need is one dead fly or one fly to fall in and die, zevuve mavet, to ruin the entire vat of oil. Right? Hence the idiom, by the way, and this is the source of the idiom, a fly in the ointment. You've all heard of that expression, right? A fly in the ointment. It comes from here. Right? Dead flies can cause the oil to be ruined. Oil is beautiful. It smells beautiful. It has this particular role. It's a yakar mich, and that's the mashal. The nimshal is the next verse. Yakar michochma mikavod sichlut mat. A little folly will outweigh all of the wisdom and all of the honor and all of the good. Meaning, and hence another idiomatic expression of that you find in actually in quoted in the name of Chazal. I'm not sure how far back it goes. Right? That a little bit of levity can destroy 1,000 words of admonition. Meaning, what's he driving at? What's he driving at? Right? Essentially, what is reflected in the other idiomatic expression, the perfect is the enemy of good. In this pursuit of perfection, in the pursuit of that which is good, it doesn't take much to ruin it. And one fly will ruin the entire vat of oil. One word of sichlut, of folly, of leitzanut, can destroy all of the great wisdom and understanding. Why? Because that's the nature of good. That's the nature of perfection. That's the nature of things which are great and complex and powerful. Doesn't take much to ruin them. Right? And we know this very well in the world of science and technology. What blew out the door of a Boeing 737 that almost sent it crashing to the ground in Alaska Airlines was the lack of 4 bolts on the door. 4 little tiny screws, and the entire flight and the entire airline almost crashed. Or if you remember the story of the unfortunate tragedy of the Challenger and Columbia shuttles, a tiny little piece of foam that blew off and knocked off a small piece of crack in a small tile, one little piece of tile, and suddenly the whole thing blew up in space on the entry point. The more complex the system, the easier it is to be destroyed by a small mistake, a small error, a single fly that can destroy the ointment. That is the weakness of Chokhmah, which is an attempt to understand the world in all of its complexity and all of its perfection. Its very power, its very perfection is its weakness. Go back to the end of the previous verse. Tovah chokhmah miklei krav. Chokhmah, wisdom, is better than tools of war. True, but choteh echad yabed davar bei. One missed arrow, or one sinner, depending on how you define. Right? If we stay in the metaphor of the tools of war, choteh is to miss. Or in this case, a sinner can destroy so much good because that's the nature of perfection. And so when the Natan said that the words of the wise are not being listened to and nobody's following it, Chacham says, yes, in the course of time, they will come to that recognition. But you're right now, nobody's listening to it because they see because it doesn't take much to bring it down. One misplaced joke, one out of place comment. Like, look at the destructive power of a defamatory remark upon a stellar career. It doesn't take much to bring down the greater they are, the harder they fall, right? That's the message. There's actually, this is the source page, which I did not send you. I apologize for that, but you can pull the, I will post the link. This is just the two verses that we just had about the fly being greater than oil, and they work forwards and backwards. But there's a famous comment in Mesilat Yesharim where he talks about leitzanut echad ubischok katan yapil ha'adam me'alav ribui gadol min hitorut ve'hitpa'alut mashalev mitorer mitpa'al ba'atzmo mider oto sham'o inyanim shi'aru. Actually gets very wordy, but the simple explanation of it is that the levity, a destructive power of levity, can destroy all of the protective armaments that a person places upon himself in words of tochacha, in words of admonition, in words of constructive criticism. The power of folly to bring everything tumbling down to the ground, and all of the Musar, and all of the words of hitorut, and all the words of inspiration, lo yaseh bo roshem klal, will make no impact on him. Not because they are weaker, lo mipnei chalushata inyanin, not because the words of wisdom and tochacha and admonition and instruction and inspiration are weak. On the contrary, but because it doesn't take more than that moment of leitzanut, that moment of folly, and to demolish it all, and to bring down all the entire structure of Musar. That's more or less the source of this idea of leitzanut achat docha elef tochachot. And so that's his first conclusion. Namely, that that is the world of the Chacham, the suffering of the Chacham, the challenge of the Chacham, is that his very effort to seek perfection is his downfall, because in the world of the Ne'anatan, all they see are small vision, small things of the here and now, and make fun of the Chacham, but the Chacham really is looking at a much bigger picture, at a much broader canvas of the world. And that leads us to the continuation of the speech, Lev Chacham Limino, V'lev Ksil Lismolo. And here again, we have to do a little bit of interpretation, because right and left have significant meaning in Tanakh. In this case, the right and the left essentially being metaphors for wrong, right and wrong. The heart of the wise man leads him to the right. Lev Chacham directs him to the right, meaning directs him to the right or correct direction in life, whereas the Lev Ksil sends him towards the left, towards the wrong decisions. Ultimately, part of that same issue. Ultimately, the Chacham is the one who prevails because he has the wisdom to understand which way to go. He has the wisdom to understand the world around him. And gam baderech kishesachal olech, when the fool walks by, kishesachal olech libo chaser, he walks without heart, meaning he walks without understanding. V'yamar lakol sechalu, and he tells everybody that he is a fool, right? Because he makes mistakes, and because he's a fool in his mindset, he's a fool in his outcome, he's a fool in his conversation, and he's a fool in how he runs the world. Whereas the Chacham, he is heading down the right path, tarte mashma, both meanings of the word right, meaning limino, but also correct path. But if the spirit of the ruler comes against you, who is the ruler in this case? Again, who is the Moshel? Who have we had so far in the world of the Moshel? Back to the previous chapter, last verse, who is the Moshel? Divrei Chachamim benachat nishmeim mizakat Moshel baksilim. These are all part of that contrast. The words of the wise against the yelling of the ruler amongst fools. Okay, so if the ruler, meaning the fool, the one who runs the world and runs it foolishly, comes against you or challenges you, mikumcha al tanach, don't give it up. Don't leave your place. Don't give up where you are in the world. Don't be swayed by the powers that be in the world of the sachal or the world of the ksil. Right? Sachal, I told you before, sachal and ksil are interchangeable, even though the letters are reversed. It's the same word. Right? Because even though wisdom has that weakness that it can easily be spoiled by a word of the fool, a word of folly, a word of late sanut, a word of imperfection, nonetheless, it has the power to lay great offenses to rest. Meaning it can, because it is so potential, powerful, because it is so significant, it has that ability to take even the greatest moments of conflict and rest, bring them to rest, bring them to resolution. Marpeh, gentleness, yaniach chataim gdolim, will lay great offenses to rest. Interesting observation also with regards to the contrast between the world of the sachal, or the fool, and the world of the chacham, is his conclusion. The word of the ksil, or the mindset of the ksil, is moving. The ksil is an always moving target. There's no anchored position of the ksil because there's no consistency to the ksil. And so the he walks and he walks here, he walks there, his position changes, his ideology changes, his perspective changes. He's always on the move. Whereas the Chacham, the message to the Chacham is Mikumcha al Tanach, stay your place. Consistent, may take a generation, may take 2 generations, may take 1,000 years, 2,500 years, but stay consistent to your position, Mikumcha al Tanach. That's the contrast from the world of the Ksil and the world of the Chacham. In the world today, who is in charge? Says Kohelet. Who is the Moshe? Right? Moshe Baksilim. The fool is the one who is ruling the world. And because of that, he claims, he makes the argument that the Chacham has no ability to achieve anything. His words are not listened to. Says the Chacham. The words are listened to when they need to be. When they have the ability to bring wars to an end, when they have the ability to bring advancements to civilization, they are there. Lev chacham liyamino, mikumcha al tanach. Don't change your position. We're in for the long haul. We're in for the long view. And it is true, the very strength, the perfection of the chacham is one in which can be easily distorted through the imperfections of the world around us. That doesn't take away from the value of the chacham itself. Okay, now he has to deal with a problem. And now the chacham, in his own self-evaluation, realizes that there's a problem in the world. What's the problem in the world? The problem in the world is what he just said. Who is the Moshe? Moshe is the fools. How many times do we look at the world that we live in today and say, it's a world run by fools, right? Or worse. There's an evil under the sun, says Kohelet. Kishgaga sheyatsa milifnei ashalit. And now he's really bordering on a much harsher critique. This evil that he's seen, which I'm going to explain in a moment, is an evil which is almost in the category of, or is in the category of, an error that has emerged from the ruler. Who's the ruler here? Who has led the world to an evil, to a mistake. Now, it could be the ruler that he's going to be talking about, because he's going to talk about Moshe, could be the Shalit and the Moshe, it's the same one. So this world is now being run in the wrong way because the ruler is a fool. That's one possibility. The other possibility, which I think is probably more correct, is that there is a subtle critique of the way in which the world has been set in place. Well, who set the world in place? And who is the ultimate ruler who set the world in place? Kadosh Baruch Hu. So now already we're getting into a little bit of the world, the taste of the Nenatan's heresy is going to rub off on the Chacham. Like an error from that has emerged from the ruler. What's the error? The fool sits in great heights. Whereas Vashirim, the rich, and in this case, the rich, as I said before, is the opposite of the Ksil, the rich in wisdom, Bashefo Yeshev. They sit in low places. Servants on horses and princes walking like servants on the earth. Purim. Remember the Purim story of Megillat Esther and Mordechai and Haman, right? Role reversals. Yeah, you're the servant on the horse and the officer, the prince, walking before them like a slave, like a servant upon the earth. That's backwards. But in this case, who is the Eved and who is the Sar? The Eved is the one who should be an Eved, but is currently the one who is serving as the Sar. And the Sar is the one who should be a Sar, but he's currently serving like an Eved. Well, who should be the Sar? The one who is wealthy in wisdom. Who should be the fool? The one who should be the servant? The one who is the fool.
So is he blaming the Moshe for that? All of that? Like, because Moshe is like ruling the Ksilim? Like, whose fault is?
So unclear whose fault it is. He describes this as the fault of the Shalit, which is more than a Moshel. So there's a certain critique of the way in which the world is. Well, who's to blame for the way in which the world is? It's very easy to turn around and blame God for the way in which the world is. Maybe he's blaming society and civilization and the power of the Moshel. Unclear, but it's not so critical for me who he blames as much as the fact that he is now in blame mode. He is now in 100% critique mode, and he's going to lash out and critique all of them. The Amal and the Natan and the Arei Elokim, they're all going to feel his lash because he's now come to the realization that the only one who should be ruling this world is the one who can design the world, the one who can articulate the perfection in this world, the one who has that vision. But we've given it over to technocrats and bureaucrats and fools.
Sounds like Plato.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. And there's a lot of different philosophical worldviews built into Kohelet. There's actually a Gemara. There's a very famous Gemara that describes this same idea. It's a story of Rav Yosef, bred to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who got sick and who had what we would call in today's language a near-death experience. And so he came about. And when he came about, Ki Hadar, when he came back to life, and he had this near-death experience, Gemara says he died and then he came back, his father said to him, "My Chazit, what did you see?" So Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Shulman Levi, says to his father, Rabbi Yosef says to his father, Rabbi Shulman Levi, he says, "Amale, olam hafuch raiti." I saw an upside-down world. Elyonim lamato v'tachtonim lamalo. Those above were below, and those below were above, meaning those who were important in this world were less important in that world, and those who were more important in that world are less important in today's world. Reflecting essentially the same idea that we just saw in Kohelet, to which his father said to him, "Amar lo bani, olam barur iti." You didn't see an upside-down world, you saw the clear world. You saw the world as it should be. not the way it is. The world today is upside down. And that's essentially what KOHELET is saying here. The fools sit in great positions of leadership and power, and the wise ones, nobody listens to them because said the Ksil, because the wisdom of the poor man is not given any credence. That's true, but at the end of the day, if you want to get somewhere in this world, you better start listening to the Chacham because he's the only one who knows how to navigate it. That's by definition the role of the Chacham. So you want your planes not to crash and your cars to turn to work, and you want your politics to bring peace in this world. In every domain of our activity, you need to start listening to the one who's got the least power in the world, which is the world of the Chacham, the world of those who are smart, the world of the philosopher and the wise, and not the powerful domain of the Ksil or the Amel, and we'll deal even with the Yerei Elokim. So at this point, he shifts into a world of critique, and he says, you want this world to work? Give it over to the world of the Chacham. Because if you don't, let me describe to you what will happen to a world that doesn't have the guidance of the Chacham. Here's what it looks like. Okay, so let's take a look. Chofer gumatz bo yipol. If you dig a pit, you'll fall into it. You break a wall through, you'll be bitten by the snake on the other side. Meaning, if without an architectural plan, if you start to dig for a building without a design, without a survey, and without designs, and without plans, and without understanding of what the total picture looks like, right? We know what can happen. Right? There's a commercial now I've seen a few times with this the guy is trying to dig and he hits a power line and all the lights go out because he was digging in his yard, right? You dig a pit and you don't realize what's underneath it. You fall into it. You break down a wall. You don't see the snake on the other side. You carve out stones and you're not careful, and they'll fall on you, and you'll be injured by them. You split the wood, you're cutting wood. How do you stop it from endangering? You have to know how to do it. There's a mikzah, there's a skill here. You have to know, you have to understand, you have to have the advice of the Chacham. That's exactly the point. Now, this pasuk is particularly interesting. It's somewhat ambiguous how to interpret it. The message is clear, but the language here has various interpretations. If the axe is blunt and not sharpened, then chayalim yigaber. Then soldiers must use more strength, right? If you try to use a blunt axe to fell a tree, you're going to have to use a lot more power than you would if the axe was sharpened. Right? That's the role of the Chacham, is to make sure that everybody understands the tools of the trade and the details of the trade. The other way of understanding this is that we're talking about warriors in the context of a battle, and then it's the axe is blunt or the instrument is not sharpened, then right? Then it's you have to transfer the word lo into both phrases. Either way, it comes to the same thing. And the conclusion, therefore, is, what's his conclusion? Advantage for success comes from wisdom. If you want this world to work, then you need to give credibility to the one and status and control and power to the only one who can ensure that when you build, you know what you're going to build, and when you create, you know what you're going to create, and you don't damage yourself in the process, and your instruments are sharp, and you know how to run the world. Take this all as a metaphor for any field of the world today, right? You're going to build a building without an architectural design. It's gonna collapse on you. You're gonna right in the world of science. You have to know where you're going.
Is that a criticism of the Amel?
Excuse me?
Is that criticism of the Amel, and he's saying the Amel is doing it without wisdom?
100%. That's so. This first attempt, this first critique is to the world of the Amel. He says every one of these examples is a direct attack on the Amel. You build without consulting the Chacham. Again, his notion is, we started with the observation that he's cut and the realization that the Chacham should be the one running the world so he can direct every other field of activity. And yet that's not the case. So he turns his whip to first, Psukim Chet Yud, to the world of the Amel. And he says to them, in your world, you want to build, you want to create, you want to break down a wall and build a new wall, you want to build a building, you want to cut down trees. In every endeavor, you are in danger unless you give advantage and power to the Chacham, because I'm the only one who can tell you how to do it. That's the role of the Chacham, to learn from the experience of life and be able to guide those around you. So you want to build and build and build. Okay, but stop for a moment and consult with the Chacham.
But the Chacham, philosopher, there are many Amelim who really know, they have the experience, so they do know how.
Yes, in real
How
world,
to operate. I
correct.
mean,
In real
scientists
world,
shouldn't look to philosophers to
right.
launch a rocket.
I mean, philosophers in our world is not the same as the philosopher in the world of the Chacham, in the world of Tanakh. When Harry Potter was first published, I always got a kick out of the fact that in Britain, they gave the first book of the Harry Potter series a different name than they did in America. In America, they called it the Sorcerer's Stone. And in England, they called it the Philosopher's Stone, because the word philosopher in England means something different than it does in America. The words in language change, but the concept here, and yes, in reality, no single individual is ever compartmentalized into one of these boxes. But from a literary perspective, what he's done is he's identified separately each one of these roles. And Shulman, in a certain sense, recognizes that at the end of the day, you have to integrate them all. And so there are people who are builders, but they also are chachamim, and they consult with chachamim. The world's not ever as black and white as it is in this kind of a text. But nonetheless, that's the message, right? You want to separate them out to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each perspective. And so that's how it, from a literary perspective, it's not a real debate, it's a literary debate. He says if the world of the Amel, without recognizing the greater status of the Chacham, is likely to fail. Okay, let's move on to the next piece, right? Let's see who he's attacked next. Im yishocha nachash b'lo lachash. If the snake bites without being charmed, en yitron lebala lashon, then there is no advantage to the charmer's tongue. So Chazal actually had a fascinating, there's a very fascinating Gemara in Erchin, actually also gave you on the source page. Not really relevant to our discussion, but it's the drash of this idea. Talks about Lashon Hara. The snake is a symbol of Lashon Hara. So the Gemara says, Amir Shlakish, what does this mean, or verse mean? The serpent bites before it is charmed. What advantage does the charmer have? Says the Gemara, in the future, mitkabtzot kol hachayot, all of the animals of the world will come to the snake and say to him, Ari dores v'ochel, ze'ev toref v'ochel. A lion tramples with its paws to kill its prey. A wolf tears with its teeth to kill its prey. Ata, ma nayesh lecha. But you attack your prey, you inject your venom, but what benefit do you have? What do you gain from it? To which the Nachash responds and says, it's about Lashon Hara, malicious speech. What does the advantage come? What benefit does the person who speaks Lashon Hara get from his activity? So the snake, from this description, becomes the symbol of Lashon Hara, right? The one who speaks evil about others without necessarily any gain for themselves. But if we look at it in the context of the Pshat and Kohelet, there's a similar message here, which is that you don't need a lot of noise and you don't need a lot of roaring and pouncing, etc., to do great things or to do great damage. Divrei pi chacham chen. The words of the wise are, without fanfare, without noise, without being loud, they are gracious, they are good. Whereas siftot ksil, but the fool continues to talk and talk and talk and talk, but he doesn't say anything. Siftot ksil tivalenu, be swallowed by his own lips. His words at the beginning of foolishness, and his words at the end of foolishness. Fool speaks many things. Man does not know what will be and what will be after him. Who can tell him? What is that talking about? This verse is really weird, strange, because this second half doesn't seem to fit at all. First of all, the word acharav in Tanakh means future, right? Like the word lefanim means past, the word acharav means future. So lo yeda adam mashiyeh, a person doesn't know what will be. For what will be after him, meaning in the future, nobody can tell him. What is it relevant? So the answer to that question really is the key to these three psukim, is to recognize that Tanakh doesn't have syntax. We don't write psukim in Tanakh with quotation marks and with colons and with commas, and right? So it's just text. So we have to kind of put that syntax back. But let me show you something interesting. Let's take a quick glance at the following verse. Okay, I'm just going to go back a couple of chapters. Let's go back to Perek Chet. Remember, Perek Chet started with Mika Chacham, who is like the wise man, the wise man is the end all and be all of everything. Chacham is the most important. And the Arei Elokim jumped in and said, I am like the wise man. I'm better than the wise man. I'm telling you to guard the word of the king. Ani pi melech shmo. Sorry about that. That was the word of the Arei Elokim. And in this message of the Arei Elokim, amongst the things he said was, Ki l'chol chefetz yesh etu mishpat, for everything. Remember, this was where he talked about judgment in the world to come, and that ultimately God will hold everything and everybody accountable. Ki ra'ata adam ba'alav, even though man's evil may be great, man will be held accountable. Ki enenu yodea ma sheyeh, ki kasher yiyeh, mi yagid lo. For he doesn't know what will be, and for what will come in the future, who can tell him? Meaning the future is unknown. And so a person needs to recognize that ultimately God is the only one who knows the future, and God will hold a person accountable for everything they do. And therefore we can't constrain, right? This is the whole notion that we can't conquer death, and therefore we have to recognize that ultimately we will stand before a maker. But who said these words? For who he doesn't know that which will be, for who can tell him what will come? Who said this?
Not Yirei Elohim?
The Yirei Elokim.
Yeah, that's
If these are the words of the Yirei Elokim, now let's go back to Kohelet Perek Yud. The fool says many things. Put in a colon here and open quotation marks. And put quotation marks at the end of this verse here. Meaning, the fool says many things. Like, what kind of things does the fool say? He says things like, what a foolish, stupid statement. Who said that? Who made that statement initially? The Arei Elokim. Which means that he's now accused the Nenatan of being the fool. He's accused the Amel of being the fool for not listening to the Chacham. And now he's accused the Arei Elokim of being the fool because he says meaningless things. So he has literally lashed out and with his whip against every possible, all three of his colleagues. Nobody has been spared his accusation or his description of them as the fool in contrast to the chacham. And in the last couple of verses, he then deals with the question of what is a country, what does malchus look like? What does leadership look like? What does power look like? Amal ksilim tiagenu, the labor of fools wearies them out. He doesn't know how to go to the city. What's the city? The city is where, remember the Amal who had kind of focused his whole effort on building a society and building a country and building a malchus, that ultimately fell apart too because of the Melech Zaken Uksil, if you remember the phrase. Says Kohelet, the Chacham, Ilach Eretz Shemalkech Na'ar. Woe to you, O land, whose king is a child. V'sarayach baboker yochelu. And your ministers eat in the morning. So what's the issue with eating in the morning? Ashrech eretz shemakech ben chorim, in contrast to the Nar, happy is you that, as a land whose king is free. V'sarayach be'et yochelu, b'gvura v'lo b'shti. And your princes eat in their time, in strength, and not out of drunkenness. What is the issue of sarayach baboker yochelu, eating in the morning? What does the time, morning and afternoon, have to do with anything?
Before anything happened, they're taking the benefits before the toil of the world started.
Exactly.
Is this the beginning of their reign when they celebrate?
No. Well, maybe, but it's essentially a reflection of a kind of reign, of a kind of mindset that says, I think, I don't know who made the comment earlier because I wasn't watching, but yes, sarayach baboker yochelu is a reflection of taking advantage, consuming that which you have without investing the effort first to ensure you have for tomorrow. Meaning you get up in the morning, you've done nothing. You haven't done anything yesterday. You eat and you drink out of what? What have you accomplished? What have you brought into the kingdom from which you can now eat and drink? Nothing. You're eating and drinking out of your reserves. That's laziness. That's irresponsible economics. That's lots of things, right? But you're eating and drinking in the morning before you've accomplished anything. Whereas
in agricultural society, you went out to work in the morning, especially here in Eretz Israel. It was hot to work later. You went out to work first.
Correct.
Only then did you eat, when it was too hot to work anymore.
Correct. That was so. So this is exactly what he's saying. If you have a melech who's sarayach baboker yochelu, they're eating in the morning. So that's laziness. That's because they're not doing anything. They're not accomplishing anything constructive. Whereas ashrech eretz shemakech ben chorim b'sarayach be'et yochelu. Your officers eat in their due season, when they've accomplished, when they've brought into the kingdom. Bigvura, out of strength. They're not getting up in the morning getting drunk. They're doing something constructive with their world. What does a kingdom look like if it is run by people who are na'ar, young, fools, right? A world of the nenatan, who is only taking and not giving, or the world of the Amel, who's giving, who's building, but he's not being guided, he's not being doing. What does such a world look like? It was essentially where the sarayach baboker yochelu, where your sarim are lazy enough to be eating in the morning instead of in the afternoon, right? To use the metaphor. So here's what it looks like. Number one, batzatayim yimacha mekareh. In the out of laziness, the roof will cave in. And because of laziness and idleness, the house will leak. Feast. Bread is made out of laughter, out of nothing. And the only value they have is wine. Ultimately, it's all about money and all about enjoyment and all about pleasure, and not about building and accomplishing and doing and understanding and creating a world that is constructive And to create a world that is constructive, what do you have to do? The first thing you have to do is change your melech. You have to appoint a new king. So who's going to be the new king? Not the Na'ar. The new king needs to be the Ben Chorim. Who's the Ben Chorim? Right? Who is the one who should be ruling this world, but who is not?
The Chacham.
The Chacham. And so ultimately it all comes back to that comment with which it began, which was the Ksil who accused the Chacham of not being heard, right? To which the Chacham turns and says, this world is being ruled by Moshel Baksili, being ruled by fools. But ultimately, in order to accomplish something in this world, you need the wisdom of the Chacham to overpower it, to be heard, even above the din of the ruling fools who think they run this world. That's the Chacham. And he's critical of everybody. He's critical. Now I can stop sharing because I finished with the text. He's critical of everybody. He's critical of the Natan for sure. That's how he starts. He's critical of the Amal. Says he's going to build of the Amal. He's going to build buildings and create structures, and without a plan, without understanding, without design, right? That's not going to go anywhere. The roof will collapse in such a building. The ceilings will leak. And he's critical of the Yerei Elokim because he says the Yerei Elokim is just words of folly, words of meaningless gibberish. Who can tell you what will be in the future? I can tell you what will be in the future because I am the Chacham, says the Chacham. And in the end, he has spared the last from none of his colleagues, and he has essentially said this world is being run by all the wrong people. And the right person to lead this world is certainly not the Ne'anatan, right? Makech Na'ar is certainly not the Amel, can't dig a hole without falling into it. Certainly not the Yerei Elokim who just speaks words of foolishness. Ultimately, this world is being run by, currently, says the Chacham, by two fools. The Malkech Na'ar, the foolish king, who could fit any one of the three, Amel, Natan, or Yerei Elokim. And the second fool, which is the Shgagashi Yatzam Lifnei Shalit, is the one who put this world together in error in the first place, and that's the ultimate Shalit of Kadosh Baruch Hu. And so the Chacham says, this world is wrong. It's all backwards. And that's where he ends. And to that ending, and we will conclude here, but to that ending, I'll just show you one more verse. The response, of course, is going to come by the one who is most acutely sensitive to the absurdity and the heresy of the Chacham, namely the Yerei Elokim. And the Yerei Elokim is going to say to him, Gam b'madacha melech al tekalel. In your thoughts, don't you curse the king. Ubechadrei mishkavacha, and in your bedchamber, in your places you think are most secure and most sacred, al tekalel ashir. Don't curse the powerful or the wealthy. Your words will be carried by the birds of the sky and the wings of the birds. They will tell what you speak in your bedchamber. You, my dear Chacham, are playing with fire. And that's the beginning of the words of the Yerei Elokim. We have to see it and unpack it, which we will, B'ezrat Hashem, in the next couple of sessions. So with that, we more or less have concluded the words of the Chacham. And what we need to do moving forward, we're about to hit the last piece of Kohelet, which is the last speech of the Yerei Elokim. And so I give you credit for staying with us until the end. We are now into home stretch. And so we...
in reality, though, everybody says that he's a Chacham.
In reality, everybody's a little bit of everything. We all have
to identify, to put a new king in and say this is a Chacham. It's very subjective.
Right. for sure. The Sefer is subjective. I'm not suggesting the Sefer is objective. In the end, a little bit, we all are a little bit of everything. We all have within us the Chacham and the Amel and the Nenatan and the Arei Elokim. The balance is ultimately where it's all going. And that's what Kohelet's going to conclude. Kohelet is not a complex conclusion, right? There's not a lot of mind-blowing opening observation. Suddenly we realize the world turns upside down from what we originally thought. His conclusion is very straightforward. But it's the navigating, what's unique about the text is the way in which he gets there, by taking apart the four dimensions of his personality and of his world, and then rebuilding them into a single collective voice at the end of the Sefer. So that's how we will, that's where we are headed. But for that, we have to get to the next unit, which will take us a couple of weeks to get through. So that's where we're at. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. I can say wow.
Thank you.
Is the criticism of the Yerei Elohim that he doesn't know what will be? Like if we said that we're talking about Olam Haba and that the punishment will be Olam Haba, is the hidden criticism here is that there is no Olam Haba? Is that what that?
That was what the Nenatan had claimed.
Oh, but what you quoted from the Chacham, it comes out like that too, because how would you know what will happen? You know, if you're saying that there is Olam Haba, or it will be in the Makom, in the Yesh, whatever we said before, how do you know that? So isn't that like the hidden criticism of the whole idea of Olam Haba?
That was the criticism thrown to him by the Nehenatan. What the Chacham is essentially arguing is that statement is meaningless.
Oh.
And so whether that means because he rejects Olam Haba or not, it's really irrelevant. What he's saying is that it's a foolish thing to say, right? You don't know what's going to be, and therefore you're going to, because you don't know what's going to be, you're going to change your whole world perspective on. Remember the Chacham, go back to the argument with the whole piece from Mishlei about the women, the good women, the bad women, right? The Chacham is about the closest thing to the Chacham of Kohelet, I would say today, and the scientists amongst us will forgive me, is essentially the scientist whose world is based on a laboratory, meaning it's about human research and our conclusions. That's where the Chacham lies. He lies in the world of analyzing the world around us and drawing those conclusions. That's his worldview. And so that which we cannot, in a classic sort of scientific perspective, right, the Chacham says, that which I don't see, that which I can't measure, that which is out into the future, in that context, is not relevant to me. It's the world of the Ksil. So that, to the mindset of the Chacham, ultimately, I think, is where sort of a little bit of a conclusion into today's world, but it's not so far off. That piece of the Chacham, which is that it's our wisdom and not some divine or revealed wisdom, that's where the Chacham and the Arei Elokim part company. So we'll see that next week.
Wow.
Interesting. That was very enlightening.
Wow.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful day.